Hello friends, welcome to JavaEE EJB tutorial. In this video, we are going to develop a servlet controller layer for our JPA CRUD example. So as usual, you can check the code snippets in the video description. Let's quickly review what are all the stuff we learned in the previous three parts. These are all the prerequisites. So this sub-series continues from our previous six part. So first we started learning the entity states: new, managed, marked for delete, and detached. This entity states plays an important role when we are learning about the CRUD actions: create, read, update, and delete. So then we looked at the operation sequence for create, then for read, after that for update. We also learned about the state also during this operation. Finally delete. Then we talked about the transaction and how entity manager attached to the business method of bean layer will perform the transaction commit towards the end of the business method call. Then we added three methods to our remote interface, and in the implementation we provided the dummy implementation. Here if you see, deposit money returns -1, withdraw money returns -1, and closing savings account returns false. Then in the previous part we created the HTML forms. So this is the account creation form. Next we created a transact account HTML form. After that we created a form for closing the savings account. Then we created a home page. From there you can reach to any of these 4 pages, and from these 4 pages you can reach back to this home page. So that way user can navigate between the account management option. That means they can create the account, or they can transact the account, and finally they can delete the account if they don't want it. So now we will deal with the create account servlet, and the create account HTML form will submit to this create account servlet. And in the create account servlet, if you see, we declared an annotation. So here the annotation is @EJB. So this is the first time we are using this @annotation. Previously we create a context, and from that context, lookup context, we will make use of lookup method. Then we will specify the string that will look up for the bean object. Here we are simply using the annotation, and this one is the mapped name which we will give when we are creating the bean itself. So here we can make use of the EJB annotation, and the bean name equal to whatever mapped name we gave during the bean creation. That one here we specified it. So then here is the actual bean object, saving AC bean remote, and we name that as SAC bean. So once a servlet is invoked, this annotation will instantiate our bean instance, and this is the SAC bean. So a bean instance will be initiated, and it will be pointed by the proxy saving AC bean remote. Next, if you see, we are making use of request.get parameter. This is a servlet piece of code. Then request.get parameter. Here we are referring the input control names. So the create account form have two input text type field. One is named as person name and another one is named as balance. So here we are checking person name not equal to null, and we are trimming it and checking that the length should not be 0. So if a user does not enter anything in the person name field, then this condition will be helpful. But if they add some blank spaces, then this condition will come into picture and length will return as 0. So if they actually typed something, then length will be more than 0. So in that case, we allow further processing. And here if you see SAC bean dot new account. So this is our stateless session bean, and in the stateless session bean we are making call to new account. So for new account we are passing the person name and balance. Then once this processing is done, we are setting the attribute action. Action is add, and we are setting one more attribute. New account ID is ID. So here if you see the bean, so in the bean itself we are making call to new account and we are passing whatever we collected here, person name and the balance. These two are fed from our HTML form, right? So those two information we are passing it to our saving account bean, and it's simply a method call, and method returns newly created ID. And we are using that ID to the set attribute method of the request context. After that, we are creating a request dispatcher for our JSP file. So this JSP file is not yet created. So we will create it later, but once this JSP is created, the JSP will look for these attributes. So using action attribute, the saving account response, the response JSP knows what action it is dealing with and what is the newly created ID. So if it is if the action is add, then JSP will look for this new account ID. But because it knows the action is add, then it will look for what is the newly added account. So that's why we are setting that attribute as well. So there are two attributes here we are setting. So this is our create account form, right? So the request.get parameter, so this one we named it as person name, and second one we named it as balance. So since here there is only one submit button, we are not validating that which button user clicked. Of course there is only one button, and when user clicks this button, the action will takes place on this create account servlet. Why? Because here in the HTML form we specified action takes place on this particular servlet. All right. So here if you look at the sequence from this HTML form, to form field information which is submitted to the servlet. So let's say this is a create account servlet CSC. So this is action sequence CSC. CSC will make use of the stateless bean and in a stateless bean it is making call to new account method. And if you see, this stateless bean is created here, and here we are making call to new account, and this bean class will internally make use of entity manager, and it will define a business method, and that business method is the new account. And here in the new account, what we will do, we will actually create the entity, we will populate the field. Here there are two incoming parameter, right? We will use those parameters, we will populate the field, then we will make a call to persist, and this persist will, I mean the new account in this bean will return an integer, and that integer here we are storing it as id. Then that id is set as a request parameter. So there are two request parameter, request dot set attribute action, and another one is new account id. Both are packed here. Then after creating the request dispatcher for this JSP, we are actually forwarding our request and response object. Since request object is flowing to this saving account response, inside this response we will read the attribute. Here we are setting it right. In the JSP we will read those attribute. By reading the attribute we will know, okay, action is add. So there are multiple way of doing this. If we use a separate JSP file, then the action attribute is not at all required. You can only send the newly created ID, and the file name here will be a response for new account, like that. So then we will end up creating 4 JSP file, but in our example we are going to deal with only one JSP file that will deal with all 4 action. That means add, update, as well as delete. Alright, this is a create account servlet. Next, this one is for account transaction, and if you see here, AC transaction is our web servlet. When URL contains AC transaction, we will land up here. Then we have EJB enterprise Java bean attribute here, saving account bean. So as in the previous servlet, we are doing the same stuff here. We just created a bean using this annotation. Then we are reading the parameter person ID. Remember, this one is the account transaction, right? We are reading the person ID, and this is just to check user field, actually something here in the PID field. Then here we retrieved PID, right? That PID, we are creating an integer, passing this string PID, and then we are making use of int value, and that way we are getting the integer representation of this string. Here user, let's assume that user will enter an integer. If they enter something else, we have to validate that, but to make the demo simple, we haven't done all those validation. We just converted that as integer. Then if you see in the request parameter, we are retrieving the amount field, and we are retrieving the transaction parameter also. So now it's time to look at the form to recap it. So this is one, right? User will enter the PID here, account ID, then amount will be entered here too. The same form contains 2 submit button. The input type is submit, and the name, both the button will share the same name, transaction. So but the input buttons differ by the attribute value. So this button type is submit, name is transaction, value is withdraw. For this, type is submit, and name is a transaction, and value is a deposit. So when a user clicks this, what happens when we make use of get parameter dot request dot get parameter transaction, it will retrieve the value, or it will return the value. This get parameter will return the value attribute of this withdraw button, and in the string action we will have withdraw. Similarly, if user clicked here the deposit button, this is the third item. If user clicked the deposit button, then action will hold deposit. So based on this, we will take the further action, and if you see, now we have amount in hand, right? To amount, let's say user typed 100, that will be retrieved here in the amount. It will be in string format. So we are constructing an integer object out of this string, then we are making call to int value. That way we will get the integer, or you can use the integer class itself, and you can go for a parse version of the method to get the integer. Alright, so the string we converted it to integer. Then if you see here action, we are checking whether it is a deposit or withdraw. User can click any of these two buttons, right, to submit the form to AC transaction. So that's why here we are checking if action is actually deposit. That's all. Then we will go to we will contact our saving account bean, and we will make a call to deposit money on our saving account. And if you see how we are passing the information, first we are passing the customer ID 1. You can see how the value is flowing from form to here to our bean method. So here user enters, they will click submit, the information is submitted to the servlet, and in the servlet using the request.get parameter we will retrieve it. When we retrieve it, it will come in string format. Then we are converting it to the to integer format, because our bean method expects the customer ID as integer. So next we give the amount. The amount is expected as integer, so we converted the amount as integer. We are setting the request attribute like what we did previously. Request.set attribute. Action is deposit. Previously, if you remember, action was add. Now the action is a deposit. Then we are introducing new attribute here, new balance. Then we are supplying the new balance. So here new balance is 0, right? Our deposit money will return the new balance, and we are making use of that. In the else portion, we are making call to withdraw money. So these are all our bean method, right? Deposit money, withdraw money. At this moment, these bean methods, if you remember, it will return -1 because we haven't yet implemented it. So we cannot test this servlet, but this will resolve the error because we actually have some dummy implementation. All right, and here the action is withdraw. Previously the action is deposit, and attribute new balance, and we are setting the new balance. So don't look for the coding standard, and if you see these stuffs are common, new balance and setting this attribute. In both the case we are setting the same attribute new balance, but we are running a separate block, so we can split this and keep it afterwards also. Anyhow, this is just learning purpose, so don't look for the coding standard, all those stuff. Let us learn the concept. So here we just done with our account transaction servlet. Now we will go for the close account, and we are creating the response JSP file. Then we are making a forward. So these stuffs we learned during the JSP learning. In the JSP playlist, the request dispatcher is explained. Here for a quick preview, if you see, we will create a dispatcher for our saving account response, then we are forwarding we are delegating the request and response to a different server unit. So this is actually a servlet, right? The servlet takes the input from this HTML form, contacts the bean. Bean will internally contact the entity manager, and based on the return value here, servlet is forwarding or delegating the further work to this JSP. So this JSP will act as a presentation layer, and it responds back to this server session. If you want, you can code it here itself in the servlet itself. You can respond back to the browser. But the advantage, if you see here, we have only one presentation layer. There are 3 or 4 servlets that will delegate the responsibility of responding back to this form to the JSP. So 4 servlet: create account, transact account, to action here, and then a close account. All these 3 will delegate the responsibility of responding to the browser session to this saving account JSP. All right. Next, we will go to the close account servlet. So you may wonder where is SAC bean. It will be there in the servlet. Here we are showing you only the do-get method, as we already talked about SAC bean. So definitely this servlet will have the @EJB, and it will initiate this SAC bean. So for close account, if you see, we need only one parameter, unique ID, that uniquely identifies our database field. One is PID, another one is person name, then balance, right? So we just need account ID, and account ID is retrieved here using the request.get parameter. Then we are checking the ID is valid. After that, we are converting that to integer customer ID. After that, we are making call to close saving account. And this bean method will make a call to the respective entity, and it will remove the record. Alright, those stuff we will see later, but for now it just contacts the corresponding bean, I mean the saving account bean, makes call to close saving account. And if you remember, we still have a dummy method, and this dummy method will return false always. Then we set action as close here. Then in the set attribute, close val, that's the attribute name, and we are converting the return value. Return value is here, and we are converting it to string. Since it returns Boolean, we will get either true or false. That's what we are setting it here in the close val. There are 2 attributes in each servlet. If you see, we are making use of the action attribute. So there are 3 servlet, right? The action attribute, if you see, the first servlet will set action attribute as add. The second attribute, it runs an if-else statement, and it sets action attribute as either withdraw or deposit. And the third servlet, which is setting action attribute as close. So based on this, the saving account response will give you a proper response message to the browser session. So that's why first we set the request attribute, then we create the dispatcher, our JSP, then we forward the request and response object, which is received by the servlet. Using here do get, we are receiving the request and response, right? We are forwarding that to the JSP file. And if you see, when HTML is sending the request, it fills this and it will give it to the servlet. In servlet we retrieve that PID. After that the servlet modifies this request. It adds two attribute, action and close well. Then it is handing over it to the saving account response. Then inside the saving account response, you can read these two attributes. Based on that, we can respond back to the browser session. So now it's demo time. Let's go to the demo and we will create all these three servlets. So in the previous video we created HTML files, right? So I'm just closing one by one. Next we will create a servlet in the dynamic web project. Here I am choosing servlet. If you are not seeing it, click on the others and type servlet. And you can see it's under the web. Click next. Java package, we are choosing a tube coding example.servlet. Class name, we are giving it as a create account servlet. Then this is the URL mapping. When URL contains this create account servlet, it will call our servlet that we are going to define now. And do post we don't want, we need a do get. Then we are clicking finish here. Let me do the formatting. So inside our do get method, but before that we need to define our EJB, right? So I'm clicking Control Shift for Control Shift F to do the format. EJB, I'm importing it from javax.ejb. Then this one should be from our stateless bean, so we are importing it. In the do get method, the code was already explained in the PowerPoint slide. Request dispatcher, we are importing it from javax.servlet. So one servlet is ready. If you see here we are getting the form field data, making call to our bean. Then we are setting the attribute, and after that we are creating the request dispatcher and forwarding the request and response set to the saving account response JSP. So this JSP we will create in the next coming video. For now we will just make an entry here. So this JSP is not yet created. Alright, now let's go to the next servlet. The next servlet is, so create account servlet is there. So this time directly clicking the package name and choosing new servlet, and you can see the package is populated. We need to enter only the class name, AC transaction, next, accept the default. If you want, you can give description here, and we'll go for do get. Here I'm doing the format. So same stuff we have to import. So all these code is available in the video description, and these codes are explained in the PowerPoint slide also. So PID, amount, transaction, okay, all these stuffs are explained. And from Servlet we are importing the request dispatcher. Now we will go ahead and create our final servlet. New servlet, close account servlet. So in the close account servlet, first we add our EJB annotation. So if you see here, I am repeating the same step for all the servlet, only the processing will so here we imported the required one. That's all. At this moment, if you see, all three servlets are ready, which takes input from the HTML form, and the HTML forms are here. These forms we created in the previous video: close account, create account, okay, this is as part of a previous one. I haven't yet cleared it. Now the create account code, there is form in our previous example, right? That one we moved it to create account.html as well as create account servlet. So for this demo, close account.html, create account.html, and transact account.html. So those are all part of this CRUD example. Alright, now we are done with our servlet. We can try launching the server and check everything is working fine. Then we will close this demo. So you can see it is started. So the bean object also there. All right. Now we will stop our server. It is stopped. That's all here in this video. Thank you for watching. Bye.